All right. So for those of you who are joining us, we're just waiting on our Spanish interpreter to join us. So I apologize for the slight delay, but hopefully she'll be here, or he or she will be here any moment now. In the meantime, I will go ahead and start introducing our speaker tonight, who did an amazing presentation for us last week on the elementary school ages, and I'm really looking forward to this middle school focus tonight. So Christine Leppones has been an executive function coach in Marin County for the past 6 years. She's trained by Nurturing Wisdom, which is a private tutoring company based out of Chicago. And Christine has worked with students of all ages, coaching them in critical skills such as test preparation, overcoming test anxiety, executive function, and growth mindset. She's also launched an executive functioning boot camp series geared towards young people in transition, including those headed to middle school, high school, college, and the workforce. Whether through one-on-one tutoring, group classes, or parent education, Christine shares strengths and tools aimed to improve students' executive functioning skills and teaches parents how to support their children in a way that fosters independence. Her empathy, humor, and no-nonsense approach allow her to connect with clients, helping them to adopt new routines and systems that eventually become habits for achieving success in school and in life. And we're so happy to have you, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I'm just going to say that I believe now the translation should hopefully be available. And we are going to go ahead and get started, unless Kari yells at me otherwise.
Thanks, Erica.
No problem.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the Kentfield PTA for having me, Kari and Erica and Sarah. And yes, I was here last week doing executive function skill building for elementary school students. So if anybody was here last week, I promise there is new information in this presentation. As Erica said, I have been in education actually for about the past 8 years. But prior to that, I was in the software industry. I was a salesperson at a couple of large software companies for quite a long time. Took a couple years off to have my kids and have been dabbling in the education world for a while. I was a paraeducator. I taught at juvenile hall for a number of years. I also taught at an alternative high school here in Marin for kids who were not able to attend to their traditional high school. I have worked for educational nonprofits, and I was an SSAT tutor, which is how I was trained in executive function skill building. I work with students who are struggling, and 100% of my students have learning differences. The majority of them right now are having mental health challenges with distance learning and COVID. But that does not mean that if you have a neurotypical child, you can't take something away from this presentation. But just to give you a little bit of my background and who I'm working with. But what I do is help students figure out how they are going to navigate school and life and everything that they need to get done in the course of their day. And how do they create systems for themselves? Because this is all going to be about creating systems and routines. How do they create systems for themselves that work with their brain and how their brain works? All of our brains work differently. So we all have to have unique systems that cater to us, that can help us to get out of the place where we're overwhelmed, or just to make life easier. How do we get stuff done so that we can feel better about everything it is that we have to do in the course of our day? I also work with parents, and I help teach them how to support their child, and finding that fine balance between scaffolding and taking over. How do you find that balance when your child is really pushing back and wanting independence? And how do you do it? How do you find that balance while kind of easing the tension that sometimes is starting to exist in the household as we have these kids who are approaching their teen years and really wanting more independence? So when we're talking about executive function skills, these are how I define them. You can look up lots of different definitions. But really, executive functions are your set of skills, and that help us to get things done. And the skills that we think about when we're talking about executive functions are things like getting started. And if you notice right here, that's task initiation, understanding, right, getting started on a project, staying on track with that project, which would be sustained attention, understanding where we are in the process of that project, which is metacognition. It's a little bit of persistence, a little bit of working memory, recognizing that other people have viewpoints that might affect or inform that process. That could be, gosh, flexibility, emotional regulation. That could be a lot of things. Overcoming obstacles overcoming obstacles as we're working on that project. And then seeing things through to completion, right? Those are all the skills when we think about real world skills that we need in order to get things done. Your executive functions control those skills. I always talk about brain development in my presentations because I think it's really important as kind of a level set. Our brain develops from the back to the front. So if you can see on this particular slide, the back is the bottom and the front is the top, and it develops from the inside out. So this is actually an MRI of the same child from age 5 through 20. And the reason why this little box is squared off here is because that is your prefrontal cortex. And your executive functions are stored in your prefrontal cortex, which happens to be in the front of the brain and thus develops last, which kind of explains sometimes why it seems like your child does not have any executive function skills. I like to tell middle school parents this, especially because if your brain takes 25 years to develop, and that is if you are neurotypical, if you have learning differences, your brain development, your brain may not reach maturity until your 30s. So if you're thinking about your middle schooler, the age that they're at right now, their brain is only halfway done developing. Okay, so I like to set the expectation that we have this idea that our kids should be doing certain things in middle school, and in a lot of times it's just simply not reality. So because our brain develops from the inside out, we are born with a fully formed amygdala. Okay, the amygdala is our fight, flight, freeze. It's our survival response. So that is why sometimes when we ask our child about their homework or how a test went, or just about anything, they feel like they are being attacked. And that is why sometimes we have the fight, flight, or the freeze look on their face. And I'm sure all of you out there are probably thinking, oh, I know exactly what that feels like. You may think you're asking a very innocent question about, hey, how's the English essay going? And if your child, if you see over here, if your child is feeling any of these high emotions, they could be frustrated because they don't understand the assignment. And so their rational brain, their cortex, shuts down. And thus they are left with their amygdala to respond because they feel like they are under threat. So our goal here is to make sure that we keep our children out of their amygdala and keep them in their prefrontal cortex. And we are going to be talking about how to do that today. Another thing that I like to talk about is when we're discussing executive function skills, our goal is to recognize that we need to help our kids. A lot of times parents think, oh, I can just go ahead and we can create a routine and then he's off and running and he doesn't need my help. But that is not the case. That is why right here, I say strive for independence with adult guidance. So I'm sorry to tell you, but you will be involved in your child's routine building, whether you want to or not. It's kind of the reality of the situation. But I also like to make sure that parents know that your child's executive age versus their cognitive age are usually not in line. Okay, your cognitive age is the age at which your brain is developing and your knowledge, that's kind of the stuff you know. And then you have your executive age, which is your executive functions, right? Which they call the prefrontal cortex the CEO of the brain for a reason, because that is responsible for our decision making and our staying on task and seeing things through to completion. So just a couple things to pay attention to as we're talking about building routines and building systems to help our child get things done. Middle schoolers typically have the attention span of 10 to 12 minutes. That is generous. That it means it's something that they're somewhat interested in. If your child does not like to read or they do not like to write, then they may only have 5 to 10 minutes of attention. So it's just something to keep in mind that we are talking about meeting your child where they are and being very realistic about where they are. The 5 to 7 bits of information, I always laugh at that because in students with learning differences, it's more like 2 to 3 pieces of information at one time. Think about multi-step directions. But if you think about that same child when they're talking about Fortnite or they're talking about their favorite YouTuber, they can hold 20 pieces of information. It is amazing. So once again, it's when they're interested in something. The 5 to 7 bits of information, if it's something like, hey, what's going on with your English book? Can you tell me something about it? And they could say, the main character's name is Bob, and he lives in a house. It's 2 pieces of information. But if they kind of like the book, they may have more information that they can provide. So just once again, I like to set expectations of what is appropriate from a brain development standpoint. These are some of the challenges that we are talking about that we might see associated with our executive functions. I'd love to see in the chat what is the biggest, I call it tension points. What are the biggest tension points in your household? It may be all of the above. And I always want people to keep in mind when you're coming up with a plan for solving or trying to help your child through one of these areas, pick one at a time. You cannot solve for everything all at once. So I'd love to see in the chat, what's the biggest area where you're struggling right now or where your child is struggling? Lack of motivation right now is the hot button in my world. Kids who typically love art are feeling not motivated to even do any art. And it's really a tough time. So I do like to make sure that, parents are aware to relax. If your child falls into all of these categories, once again, these are certainly different times, but it's also important to remember that as we're coming up with a plan for solving for one of these things, to pick one thing at a time. I can't tell if I'm hoping my box is not blocking me from, okay. So before we talk about tools and strategies, I always like to use the metaphor of, the air mask that you get in the plane, and the instructions are always put your own air mask on first before you help your child. And really the goal is not to be perfect and to be emotionally regulated all the time, but really emotional regulation is where you need to start. Recognizing that when you're not emotionally regulated, modeling for your child how you get back into regulation, whether that's deep breaths, telling them that you should reschedule the talk for later that you wanted to have. Maybe you and your child decided that he was going to get caught up on all of his math homework last night, and then you went to go check on him the next day, and he still had not completed any of the math homework, and you lose your mind and say, we had a plan. That is not the time to start talking about why the plan did not go well, because once again, your child will read your emotional dysregulation and they themselves will feel like they're under attack. They will respond with some kind of fight, flight, freeze response. And we will be stuck talking to either an angry face, we'll be stuck talking to their back because they've left, or we'll be stuck talking to a blank face because they have frozen and are ignoring us. So we need to make sure we emotionally regulate ourselves. One of the most powerful tools that we have is our ability to model what it looks like to get back into emotional regulation. So step one, consistency plus routine equals habit. Okay, Where we all tend to fall down is on that consistency piece, or actually really the collaboration piece. We put together routines, and sometimes we don't ask our child, well, what do you think about this? We just say, here, I've created a schedule for you. You're going to follow it. And that's when we start getting these control issues. Your child wants some independence. You need your child's fingerprints all over this routine, whatever that routine is going to be. A morning routine, an after school routine, a homework routine, a weekend routine. You need your child's buy-in. I mentioned earlier, meeting your kids where they are. This particular routine, this is a child where this is actually a high schooler who I know can handle filling in can handle going from task to task. If you know your child can't make it from the bedroom into the bathroom, back into the bedroom again without getting distracted, then you know that you need to add maybe an extra reminder into that routine. And really the goal is, it's kind of a multi-step goal. When you are creating a routine, you start small, right? You may not go for the full morning and afternoon routine in one place. You may just decide to start with the morning routine and start there. Reflective listening. Video games is the perfect example of when you can use reflective listening. All of our kids think they don't get enough video game time. We think they get too much. So we have these questions where, video games might be inhibiting them getting their homework done. So we want to have a conversation with them. So what does that look like? We're going to have a collaborative conversation about homework routine and video games. I'm sure nothing will go wrong in that conversation. I'm sure it will be emotionally regulated the whole time. And I say this because I have 2 gaming boys at home, and infuriate you more than your own child. Or creating a new routine around homework, what it's going to look like is saying to you want your child to speak first. So it seems like the homework hasn't been getting done, and they'll say, what do you think? No. And then the reflective listening part comes back. Instead of you saying, yes, it is, the reflective listening part is, what I'm hearing you say, you're hearing them. What I'm hearing you say is, you don't think that the video games is a problem. You don't think that you're playing too much or that it's affecting your homework. Your child's like, yep, that's what I think. And then our response is, well, do you mind if I share what I'm noticing? And once again, we are using reflective listening. We're also observing, we're not judging. What I'm noticing, what I'm seeing, what I'm noticing is, you're staying up until 9 o'clock and you were supposed to finish your homework at 7, but I noticed that you were gaming till 7. So it seems like maybe we need to kind of come up with a new plan for the video games. What do you think? The child's like, oh, yeah. So let's try something out. And we kind of treat it like an experiment, really. Modeling your own behavior on how you that we ourselves have with maintaining focus in the face of technology. Always a good way to start. Step 2, make it visual. Children really cannot see the passage of time. And so it's really hard when we give them verbal directions for them to understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing. You need to find a system that makes sense for your kid. Once again, this is not you creating a routine and shoving it down your child's throat. This is you asking them, like, what do you think? You can go onto Google and you can type in morning routine into Google Images, and you will get 25 so many different options. Ask your child what they think. Which one do you like? In these particular cases, these are actual examples of my students, what they use. One student is just writing it in a notebook. Keep in mind also this beautiful whiteboard here, which has the student's subject, their current grade, the subject, and then these are their missing assignments. By the way, this student is in high school and they did not do this on their own. They had parent help. So that's in high school. So your child may need help with getting some kind of a visual routine going. The sooner you can get them to accept that they should be writing it down, the easier things become as you start wanting to introduce a planner. This planner right here, this does not happen on phase 1 or version 1.0 of creating a routine. And it was due 2 weeks later, we start feeling a need maybe for a weekly view of our work. And then that, once again, that comes about naturally because maybe we've had a hiccup in the plan and we missed something. You need to help your child organize this. If you're trying to get your child to start writing down their assignments, attaching it to something that they already do is one of the best ways to take something and make it more of a habit and make it more consistent. I always say, students aren't necessarily going to take a planner out in school. So what can you attach that writing down in a planner or writing down your assignments? What can you attach that to at home? Maybe your child gets a snack at the same time every day. They come home, they get a snack. Maybe you print out a copy of a planning sheet and you put it where the snack is, or you put it on the counter with their snack. And that's your child's reminder. I'm going to eat the snack and I'm going to write down the routine. So that's just a simple way of getting them to remember, is attach it to something they already do. And this is great for adults as well, by the way. Something to kind of think about is we often use language where we say to our kid, well, go get ready, or are you done yet? And we do not think about what that means, right? So what does ready look like? We've had probably 30 plus years to know what ready feels like. Your child could come downstairs and think that they're ready. So having and they could be missing their socks, they could be missing their shirt, but in their mind, they're ready. So that's why creating some kind of visual, like what does ready look like? Maybe you have a picture of what ready looks like by the door. I love this example of cleaning the room. It's another great way to kind of talk about done. Like, when are you done cleaning your room? Most children would take everything off of the floor and shove it into the closet and say, I'm done. But this breaks it into steps. So step 1, get everything off of the floor. If they're my kids, they're going to take it and put it on that chair right there. And then that's why step 2 is clean the chair. And step 3 is clean the desk, and step 4. So that way, what we're doing is we are, first of all, not looking for perfection. We are praising the process. We could come in, a lot of times what we do is we say, hey, go clean your room. And we don't give any steps, right? When we were talking about breaking things into organizational steps, go clean your room. Our child goes in, cleans the stuff off the floor, shoves it into the closet and says, I'm done. We walk in and we lose our minds. And we're like, what are you talking about, right? So once again, we're using that judgment language instead of saying, well, hey, I noticed you did step 1, you cleaned off the bottom of the floor. Great, let's move on to step 2. So you are praising the process. There's a couple of executive function gurus who I follow, and they use the packing the suitcase metaphor. What does it look like? Talk about it, right? If you're going on a trip, how long are you going for? What will you need? How long, what will the weather be like, right? You are talking about the future. Once again, your child cannot really see time. So speaking about time can be really helpful for them to figure out what it is that I need and what it is that I need to include in my routine. I'm going to ask another question. Okay. So what is the number one question that you think that I ask my students? And this is for any age. This could be middle school, high school, college. And I can't see where, oops, sorry about that. I have to, is what's next. And this once again goes back to not being able to see into the future, not being able to visualize it. This is what your child feels like when they finish their homework. But they do not, that homework, I guarantee you, they're done with their math problems. And I guarantee you that that math worksheet is still on their desk. And they have not asked themselves, what's next? So one of the best things you can do with your child is say to them, they could come in and say, I finished my math homework. I finished my English assignment. And you can look at them and say, okay, well, what's next? Get them to use their planning brain, get them to think about their future, get their future thinking brain going, and start that becoming the habit, so that then eventually they will start asking themselves, what's next? Okay, I just got home from school and I put my backpack away. What's next, right? So it's all kind of part of jogging our memory as we're creating these routines. Step 3, timers. Keep in mind, if you have a highly anxious child, I have a lot of students who have a great deal of anxiety, and timers are very anxiety producing. So this is once again collaborative. If your child is anti-timer, and you have to be, you have to use your parenting hat and figure out, are they just saying it because they don't want the timer, or are they saying it because it really does freak them out? Analog clocks are a great way to teach your child to kind of understand the passage of time. The reason why I say start at 4:07, there is an ADHD coach on the East Coast. Her name's Leslie Joselle, and I've got her website at the end of the presentation. And she always says, kind of make it different, make it fun. Like if you tell your child that they're going to start, that the routine is to start homework at 4 o'clock, they don't really think about that. But if you say 4:07, all of a sudden it kind of captures their attention a little bit. I always think it's an interesting, I try it with my students. Some students think it's dumb and they tell me that. Some students like it. So once again, everybody's system is different. One of the best ways to help your child kind of understand and get more accustomed to time passing is to create start times and stop times and midpoints and talk about those. You as a parent are definitely the one who is going to have to initiate that. That is not something that is innate to your child. Scheduling in movement breaks within that start time, stop time, break time is a great way to, if you have a child with focus issues, it seems like if your child is on Zoom for multiple hours. So, and then be expected to sit down and do homework. So movement is our friend. Maybe part of the homework routine is that we are going to, if there's reading involved and your student doesn't love to read, being locked in their room in a super quiet room is not always the best place for us to read because we get distracted, especially if we don't love reading. So maybe we move into the living room where there's a little bit more activity for reading. Maybe we set a timer. How long can my child read before they become distracted? Does your child know? So this is why we discuss these things. Hey, I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. Let's see how far you get in reading. And if your child comes to you and just like after 5 minutes, you find them walking around the house, maybe you need to dial back the timer. Tomato timer, this is part of the Pomodoro method. I have a lot of students who really like this method. Once again, it's not analog, but there is research that shows that the most effective way to get work done is 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break, 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break. Tomato timer, it's a website. tomato timer, you can actually increase the break time. You can give yourself a 5-minute break or a 7-minute break, and it kind of counts things down. I have a lot of students who really like doing work in short bursts. You know, a lot of times, so Jeff Copper is a ADHD and attention coach. And I thought that this statistic was really interesting. If you have a child who is procrastinating, it is most likely that they don't understand what is being asked of them, or they're overwhelmed by how much is being asked of them. So one of the questions that I love to ask a student or somebody who is procrastinating, and it's even something I ask myself, what's one thing that I can do to get started? So maybe they're writing an English assignment and they have no idea what they're going to write about. So they could just sit there for hours and not know what they're supposed to be doing. They don't know what to write. In this particular case of an English assignment, you may have to sit with your child and figure out. I find that having a discussion about what they're going to be writing is one of the best ways, and sometimes recording it is sometimes the best way to get them past that block that they have. And once they start talking about it, and then they listen to the recording, all of a sudden they have like something that could be a loose outline. And they can all of a sudden start thinking about, well, oh, I have more to say on this topic than I thought. Okay. And that kind of gets them moving. Chunking it out, break it down by time or by task. If your child is, doesn't love math, you can approach this a couple of different ways. And once again, you could do it with a timer or not. Let's do, maybe if you have 15 problems, maybe you say to your child, let's just work on the first 5 and then we'll take a break. Or let's set a timer and work for 15 minutes and see how far we get. And then all of a sudden, and we're approaching it by like, let's just get started on just this one small thing. It's not saying, let's complete all of the math homework, especially if your child has, a lot of missing math or some late assignments. We're just starting out with one thing, and we're just doing it for a small amount of time. And all of a sudden we start adding up those little chunks of time over and over, and we start digging ourselves out. Paying attention to times where your child does seem to be stuck or seems to be kind of becoming dysregulated is really super important, because you may find, what I find is there are common themes. I had one student, when the English teacher provided a rubric for their writing assignments, if the rubric was longer than 2 pages, he became completely undone, and also like not very pleasant to be around. I mean, think about how you feel when you're stressed. Some of us get a little snappish, and we look at our kid and we're like, what is your problem? It's because they're overwhelmed. They don't understand what's happening. They don't understand what's being asked of them, and they need some help. And when your child is starting to become overwhelmed, you need to pick a calm time to come up with a plan. You can't do it while they're in the middle of the overwhelm. Let them work through it, and then say, you know what, why don't we meet after dinner? Once you've had a time to just chill, let's leave math alone for the afternoon. And why don't we grab some dinner, and then we'll talk about like how we're going to work through this. Maybe we need to talk to the teacher. Maybe we need to send the teacher an email and say, I don't know what I'm doing. I need a little bit of help. Or maybe your child just needs a break, and say, you know what, why don't we just do the first 5 problems? And then we'll send the teacher an email and just let her know that you worked on the first 5 and that you're going to finish the next 5 tomorrow. And teachers are understanding. They are really they really do understand when they get a note from a child. And I think it's really important part of the process for children to see their teachers as an ally and somebody who's looking to support them, and not somebody who's out to get them. A lot of work I do with parents is about language, the language that they're using with their children. So, their child gets a project and the parents get super frustrated. Maybe the teacher has not broken it up into small pieces, and all of a sudden, or maybe your child has forgotten about it, and we get frustrated and we like, all right, I guess I have to do it for them. But if we look at it as doing it for them, then we're teaching them that they can't handle it. If we do it with them and come up with a collaborative plan, then all of a sudden we take on a different role in this process. Okay. a lot of times we get frustrated with our kids because they may be stuck and we feel like we have to jump in and take over and do it for them. But what we need to be doing is doing it with them, showing them, talking them through the process. What is it that I would be doing if this was my project? This is how I would do it. What do you think we should do? A lot of parents, especially parents with kids with learning differences, they just will say, well, he just won't do his math. If you look at it from the viewpoint of they can't do it because they're stuck, they don't understand the material, they weren't paying attention in class, whatever it may be. If you look at it from a can't, once again, it kind of changes the lens with which you're looking at your child and the issue that you're having. Should, for anybody who's seen my presentations before, I believe should be eliminated from the English language. I cannot tell you how many parents say to me, he is a senior in high school, he should know how to do this. And I actually listened to a talk the other day with the woman who co-wrote a book, for anyone who knows Dr. Shafali, who's a psychologist and pretty popular right now. She wrote a book about anxiety with this other woman, Renee, and I know I'm not going to remember Renee's last name. Renee used should, and she said, we should all over each other. We've been shoulded all over, and obviously using it as a replacement for the SHIT word, which I do really believe it feels like it has that same connotation. So instead of saying they should be doing this, we may have to provide them a little bit of scaffolding in order to kind of get them through to whatever the next level is of what they're doing. Lecture versus collaborate. We like to tell our kids what to do, and sometimes we get real frustrated with them. But when we start using reflective listening and asking them what they think, what do they see, and then telling them, well, this is what I see, and then coming up with a solution together, it's maturation. The judgment and observation thing, I just have to just say that when we talk to our children, once again, this is that reflective listening. We tend to look at kids and say things that are very judgmental, like, why didn't you do this? I saw you playing video games. I saw you doing this. Instead of saying, hey, what I noticed is that this was happening. And it's kind of a what if, like what's happening, like what I noticed, and then this is the outcome that I've seen, and making it super logical. And finally, our last point is, reflect and pivot. I said before, there's always going to be version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, right? Like so many times we fall down because we've been met with a challenge and we put together a routine and something goes wrong and we abandon it, rather than something goes wrong and then we make sure that we have a conversation where we ask, okay, so we tried a new way to get math done tonight or last night. What went well? The child said, well, I got started right away. Great. What didn't go well? Well, I found I lost my focus after about 15 minutes. Okay, so what should we change? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't do math in my bedroom. Maybe we should do it out at the kitchen table and we can work together while I'm, balancing, while I'm, doing some budget work or while I'm doing some work. By reflecting and pivoting and recognizing that things aren't going well, and then coming up with another, going to version 1.0, 2.0, we're building resilience. Similar to a software program, most software programmers do not abandon their code at the first sign of a challenge, right? They continue to work at it and then it keeps getting better. So you have version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. We are building resilience with our kids. We are showing them that you may make a mistake, but all you have to do is learn from that. I can tell you with 100% certainty that with every failure that my students have had, the biggest learning has come after that failure. I was just telling Kari earlier that progress reports have come out in the high school and parents are freaking out. I've got students who are failing their grades, failing their classes. And now we We reflect on why are their grades failing? Is it missing homework assignments, low test scores? And then what can we do from there? What's our plan from there? And recognizing that, and that's usually when the students are like, you know what? I really didn't study enough at the last test. Boom. The parents could tell them 500 times that they're not studying enough, but until they hit that failure, they won't get that, they won't gain that understanding until it's actually happening to them. And also keep in mind, this is baby steps. Like, it takes sometimes my students 6 months to even write assignments down on a regular basis without me reminding them. So patience. One of the best words of advice I can say is that you will fail. Asking your child when you're putting together a new routine, what do you think? Like, we put this great routine together. What do you think could happen? Like, what obstacles could we encounter? I'm like, well, I know my favorite YouTuber is dropping a new video at 5 o'clock, and we scheduled me to be doing math at 5. So and I always get an alert in my, I get a pop-up in my computer. I'm probably going to want to watch that YouTuber video. Well, then what should we do? Right? Have a list of resources next to your desk. Once again, paying attention to triggers, and then making sure we're using that judgment-free language, the observation language. What I hear you saying, what I noticed happening. What I noticed is we put together a plan for you to start homework at 5 o'clock. And then when I came into your room at 6, you were still gaming. So what do you think we should do? How can we get it so that you start at 5, right? So once again, it's not you coming in and starting to yell like, we had a plan, and sending your kid off into amygdala land, right? We are having a conversation. Some resources. I'm not going to keep this up for too long, simply because you will get a copy of this presentation and the slides at the end. But these are some great sites. They do definitely, because all of my students have attention issues, a lot of them are focused on ADD and ADHD. But that does not mean that there's not really good advice on all of them that could be used for any child. And this is just a summary of what we've learned, and we have time for questions. I think we have, about 15 minutes for questions. So I'm happy to answer questions. And really the number one thing, I know I've said the number one thing a couple of times, but this week in particular, I happened to be listening to a lot. There was a summit for this organization called Bright and Quirky Kids. It's for kids who are differently wired. And they had a huge summit this week with lots of speakers, and every single speaker, the number one thing they say, that parent-child connection is the most important one. So rather than yelling at your child, about their missing math assignments, even though you've reminded them 500 times, your relationship will go a lot further and you will get a lot more out of it, including probably the results that you would want if you have a simple conversation. And you may have to have the conversation over and over, and you may want to bang your head against the wall. I understand this, but the key is, once again, modeling that emotional regulation, not banging your head against the wall. Maybe do that in private when your child is in bed, but that you should recognize that your child should feel comfort. If your child can come to you when something is not going right and they are failing, and they know that you are a source of calm, then they can utilize that for the rest of their lives. So thank you so much. And I am happy to answer questions. I can pull up the chat unless Kari or Erica has been monitoring the chat. Happy to answer any questions that pop up.
Yeah, so far it looks like we have
You're
sorry.
kind of both at the same time. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say people can do questions through. You can raise your hand, and we can, allow you to talk. You can do Q&A or the chat.
And I'll just go ahead and read the one thing I see in the chat right now is, can you talk a bit about rushing through assignments and how to support kids who are struggling with that?
Yeah, so the rushing through of assignments happens obviously for a number of different reasons, but we have a lot of times kids rushing through tests, not double checking their work. So a lot of times they are trying to get to either they want to finish it as quickly as possible because they don't like it, or they have something else that they want to do. So I would suggest breaking that up into smaller pieces. You also may have to, let's say it's an English assignment and they rushed through it and you read it and you're like, this is terrible. Like, this was not good. And your child refuses to double check their work. Or maybe it's math. Math is a big one where they don't like to double check their work. You may have to let them get the grade that they get and then have the discussion once you see the grade. And then it is, hey, because I have a lot of students, all my students like to rush through their work, or they don't like to double check things. A lot of them have accommodations for tests and they don't like to take the accommodations. They have time and a half and they won't do it. And it isn't really until they get a grade where they realize they missed so many points because they didn't show their work, or they missed, I had one student who literally missed an entire page of questions because he didn't scroll down. And he beat himself up over it. And it was really, really hard. But he will never make that mistake again. If they're rushing through things and not doing a good job, then I would say you can certainly put in place. It could be like, we want to do our best work, but sometimes we just want to get it handed in. But there's got to be a fine line between the two things. So I find that setting up some kind of a check-in with the parent where, why don't you work on it for 15 minutes and then let me check it. And then maybe, we work on it for another 15 minutes and you may get resistance from your child, in which case you may have to let them go and hand it in, and it may not be good at all. And then you utilize whatever feedback you get from the teacher, utilize that when you have the conversation. If they get the grade that they did, if your child cares about the grade, or they're surprised by the grade, or they get the paper back and it's marked all up in red, they may not feel good about that. And you can say, oh, I noticed that you got not, how do you feel about the grade? And they're like, I don't know. And well, what do you think we could do differently? I don't know. Well, I noticed that you spent X number of minutes on this assignment. I wonder, like, your teacher assigned it on Monday and it was due Friday. How long do you think you were supposed to spend on that assignment? I don't know. Well, maybe, if it's over the course of a week, I bet it's longer than the 10 minutes. So maybe we can work a little bit harder. I can help you set a timer. I can help you maybe break it into chunks. We'll do a little bit on Monday and a little bit on Tuesday, so that we can make sure that you're finishing everything, right? Getting as many points as we can get by taking our time. And it's not always easy. It's not always going to be a perfect conversation, for sure.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. The first is from Lauren. She says, back to procrastination. My daughter tends to not be able to start until the last minute, but then beautifully completes things once started. In the meantime, the whole family has to sit through the anxiety of the looming big assignment. Are some people just better at leaving it to the last minute? Should we just accept that this is how they are wired?
Yes. There are people where procrastination works really well for them. However, if she is, becoming emotionally dysregulated and she's kind of freaking out, then using some reflective listening to say, like, maybe if she's getting the grades she wants, then you can't really play the grade card. If they're not getting the grades they want, you could certainly play the card where, like, what would have happened if you had started even just an hour earlier? What would have happened if you had started the day earlier? If your daughter is, I say holding the family emotionally hostage and freaking out and having all sorts of emotional dysregulation, you can have a conversation with her at a calm time and just say, hey, I get that you do a really good job. We're super proud of how well you do. It seems like you're uncomfortable when you're in that like 5-hour phase when you're trying to get something done. You seem like you're stressed. it's not healthy for you. It's not pleasant for anybody in the house. So maybe we can come up with, like, do you have some ideas on how we can help you feel better about getting the assignment done, but not do, the procrastination thing obviously is working for her, but maybe we could just start a little bit earlier where she could feel some relief and not have that anxiety. So I guess it just depends on if she's doing a number on herself, then that's not healthy. And if she's wreaking havoc on the family piece, then, then maybe asking her if maybe, why don't we, a lot of times we procrastinate because we think we have plenty of time, or we think that the assignment's not going to take as long as it does. So we can start thinking like, hey, let's just take one step. What's one thing that we can do? And a lot of times, especially with like writing assignments, we can, at the beginning of the assignment, we can kind of break it up into pieces where I will literally break it up and say, let's do something. I call it like a really like low key thing, like something that's not stressful. Like you're going to have to come up with a topic. That could take a child, that could take me a whole day to come up with a topic. So maybe you go for a walk and say, hey, let's talk about the topic. And then all of a sudden your child's like, oh, okay, we'll talk about the topic. Sometimes having that discussion helps to kind of move the process along. So you can kind of try lots of different things. Treat it like an experiment. Don't make it your will over your daughter's, but treat it, you could approach it like, hey, I noticed that you don't feel great and you seem super stressed. Maybe we could try, like, what do you think about trying to start a little bit earlier? And I'd be willing to help you. Because sometimes getting started just means doing a small thing, which means opening up have you created a Google Doc yet? No. Have you put a title on it? No. Those are really small steps. And sometimes those students, once they start getting, like once they have a topic picked, that's all they need to kind of move forward and take those steps forward.
Thank you. All right, we've got another question in the chat. Kari's saying, I've been pushing my son to push through his emotions and issues during homework because I thought it would help build perseverance and make him feel like he was able to push through and really accomplish something. But it often ends in tears. Is it better to let it go and let him finish things later when he is not upset?
Yeah, I mean, I guess anytime there's, that emotional dysregulation, there's a reason for it. And I think it's probably worth a conversation about why he's got these emotions. And it's worth asking, like, and I don't know what the specific emotions are, but picking a calm time to discuss it, pushing through and like ignoring those emotions, there are going to be times where it's going to be difficult and you do have to push through in order to get something done. But if you have the time, and if any of those emotions are rooted in like anxiety or perfectionism or anything like that, talking about that, I have a lot of students who suffer from perfectionism, and it's really, really difficult for them to get something done and not beat themselves up over it. And they get highly emotional. So we have to kind of talk through, well, what is, let's make sure, first of all, we have enough time to get the assignment done in a way that feels good. But then sometimes there's never enough time. So we have to come up to a point where it's okay to hand it in at this point. And sometimes, if they're feeling unsure about the assignment, sometimes you have to get the teacher involved. I don't know if I'm not knowing specifically what like the emotions are. It's hard for me to answer the question, but I'm happy to give more specifics if you want.
Okay, so since I can unmute myself, I did. So, I think basically what happens sometimes it's things that he's perfectly capable of doing. It's math that he understands, but every once in a while he'll just kind of have a breakdown in the middle of homework, and I will just push him. I'll be like, let's just get this done. Just take a deep breath. Let's get this done. And sometimes he can get through it. And then other times, he just has sort of a complete breakdown. It's not something he doesn't know how to do. And so again, maybe I have been going about this the wrong way, but just thinking, okay, if I can just get him to stick with it, he'll feel good about himself and learn how to stick with things. So,
Well, I think so. Sometimes you actually do need a break. If it's something that's particularly challenging, he may know how to do it, but he may not like it. In which case, how do we, because if you're pushing him, he needs to build up his own ability to stick to itiveness, right? He needs to build that up on his own. So by giving him the tools, by saying like, if he's becoming emotionally dysregulated or highly emotional or agitated or whatever, it's okay to tell him to recognize those emotions and let's take a break. If you're worried that he's not going to get it done, then then you need to make a plan, like, and the plan needs to be made prior to him hitting that emotional high point, which is, hey, if you start getting frustrated, and ask him like, what's going on? Like, are you frustrated? Like, I see that you're getting upset. What's going on? Like, are you feeling like this is never going to end? Are you frustrated because you hate math? Did you have a bad day? Do you hate your teacher? Do you feel like, there's no point to doing this? You don't understand it? Like, finding out what it is that's causing him to hit that. What's the trigger for that emotion? And talking about it prior to that happening, right? So you can't do it while he's in the middle of it. And just saying, hey, sometimes I noticed, after about 15 minutes when we're doing whatever, you kind of start getting like a little upset and you get frustrated and you start like, and you notice like the body, if it's anything like anxiety provoking, like you start seeing the like hand gestures and things like that, some ticking, then just say, hey, like when I see that, like, how about we take a break? Let's go take a walk. And when we come back, and the plan is we're going to take a walk, we're going to calm down, give ourselves a break. Maybe we'll have a snack and then we'll come back and then we'll go get back to it. Maybe he needs it broken up into pieces for him. Maybe it feels like some students look at homework and they look at it as this collective, gigantic, heavy thing. They may only have 2 assignments that are going to take them 10 minutes each, but they view it as homework and it's heavy and it's hard. But that's why in the example of like the visuals that I gave, I asked my students to kind of say, well, how long do you think this is going to take you? And getting students to start estimating time on things can really help with their perception of how long time is. And okay, so you have a math worksheet. You did half of them in class. How long do you think the rest will take? Most kids know. They're like, well, I finished that in the last 10 minutes of class. So I don't know, 10 minutes. Great. Should we do all of them right now? And giving him some control over how he does it, Kari, I think will help him to feel like he actually can get through this. And yes, you want him to be able to push through, but you also need him to recognize that if there's something that's causing him to feel like he can't push through, he needs to figure out what that is. You need to help him figure out what that is. And then what's the plan for when that happens? It may not be in the future to push through. It may be that he needs a legitimate break.
great. Thank you.
We have another question in the chat. It says, any tips for a 12-year-old boy who says he does not need to learn the topics being taught in school? I don't see the point. Why will I ever need to calculate the surface area of a pyramid?
Yeah.
For example.
Mm-hmm. Love those. Yeah, I get those all the time. So in the case of, there's always the message I usually tell my students is, there is always going to be something that you don't want to do, right? There's always going to be that project that you're asked to do for school, that thing your boss asks you to do. You may have things that you have to do that you don't like to do. And sometimes this is part of what we're required to do in order to move on to whatever's next. So you may hate the surface area and you may not see any point to it, but that builds upon that, gets you to whatever is next. And you may find that once we get to, once we graduate from algebra, we move on to geometry. Maybe geometry is more interesting. So it is kind of not like buck up, buckaroo, but kind of the message is, there's always going to be something that you don't want to do, and it may not be important to you. So let's just get this done. It may not have to be perfect. This is where that like, get it done. It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's just get this, check this off of our list. It's absolutely okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. Especially if your child hates it. You know, making them go back and like, make sure everything's perfect. Like, let's just get this done and hand it in so that we can feel better about handing it in. And we want to do well. Like most students want to do well. He may say like, this is stupid. And there, once again, when you get those emotions, there may be there may be something else going on where he's not understanding it. He may not like the teacher. Like there's lots of things, but there are always going to be things that you don't want to do. And that is kind of where we start saying like, you know, I've got to pay bills. I don't love doing it, but I got to do it. And, or, you know, if it's math, you could also utilize your teacher, use your teacher as an ally and say, can you point him to like 10 careers where you have to figure out what the surface area is? Like there, you have to have a base understanding of some of these things. So that could also be another way, like where you're bringing in like a third party expert who's talking about, I use surface area all the time. I bet you could do a quick Google search and find out, but you're never going to teach him to love it if he doesn't love it, but he does have to do it because that's just the way the world works. You're always going to have to do stuff, but there's also stuff that you love to do, right? And by doing the stuff that you don't like to do, when you can get that done, then you can move on to something else that you like. So, and maybe using some kind of reward system. So they talk about, you know, extrinsic rewards. Some students, especially if they have learning differences, do not have that intrinsic motivation to get things done. So just being like, hey, let's get the surface area stuff done. And then we'll go and we'll, you know, we can have dessert, or let's get the surface area stuff done. And then we can go outside and throw the baseball, or let's get this done and have there be something pleasurable at the end. So that then when he gets through it, he starts associating getting through something difficult with a reward at the end. And then eventually that gets to a point where he's like, oh my gosh, that's done. I feel so much better. He's never going to love it, but you can at least kind of teach him that perseverance of getting through something that he doesn't love and kind of start laying down the groundwork for that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions out in the audience that you'd like to ask? And on the screen, Christina shared her website and email, so you can also always, you know, reach out directly.
Yep.
But we just want to make sure we give people an opportunity to ask any questions. But I'm not seeing anything. Kari, are you seeing anything that I'm missing? I don't think so.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute.
Oh, it's okay.
I don't see anything else.
Okay. Well, Christine, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Both of the nights, we really enjoyed getting to listen to you. And you're exactly right. There was very different information at the two. There were commonalities certainly and
Sure.
sort of thematic links, but it was really great to listen to both. So thank you so much. And we really do appreciate you. And again, check her website and email her if
you have
are
questions,
interested in some of her services and such. So
I do have for anybody with 8th graders, I do run skill building classes for transitioning into high school. I usually run those in the summer. If you have elementary school students, I have usually, you know, like 5th grade to middle school, 6th grade to middle school, you know, transitioning into middle school. So kind of what your students should be expecting, how can they be prepared, and just so they're not surprised. A lot of times they get into that next level and they're surprised. And sometimes the systems that they had before, where they were able to kind of fly under the radar with some of their subpar systems. And then they go up to the next level and they're like, huh, my subpar systems aren't really so good anymore. And that is a rude awakening. So I will update my boot camp. Summer feels like a long way away right now, but I will have I'll have my boot camps updated probably by May. So thank you so much for having me. I always really enjoy doing parent ed, and do feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions or point to resources. So thanks so much. I hope everybody has a good evening.
Oh, and thank you. And one last question. We will have the recording available. We'll send out that link through Parent Square. So you'll be able to access it. And it will be, I believe, also hosted on our website. So stay tuned for that. We'll get it out to you as soon as we can.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great night.
You too.